Okay, let's go back to the two dots at the beginning of Gemara there, and let's see what's going on. So the Mishnah said, we build the wall in the middle. Either because Hezek Re'iyah Shmei Hezek, either because damage that somebody sees your properties count as a damage, and therefore they can compel each other to build a wall. And if the Mishnah goes on to say it goes in the middle following the local custom, or Hezek Re'iyah is not a Hezek, and the reason why they're compelled to build a wall in the middle is because they both agree to do so. Those are the two options. At this point in the Gemara is still with the substantiated opinion at this point is that Lav Shmei Hezek, that it's not a Hezek, right? Because the Gemara left open the question that if Hezek Re'iyah Shmei Hezek, then why do we require their consent? Right? The Mishnah opens up with Rotzim. They wanted. So why do we need their consent? And the Gemara says the reason we need the consent because it's less than 4 amas for each. Right? That's going to come up later in the Gemara, which Rashi told us about and Tosafos told us about. And the one question the Gemara didn't resolve is why it says lasas mechitza, to make a mechitza, when it should have said lachzais, to divide. So at this point, the Gemara is substantiating the opinion of Lav Shmei Hezek. Right? The other opinion comes.
That the whole thing is about that one specific case.
In which view? In Lav Shmei Hezek, then you don't have to have Dal Damas. Then Rotzu is because they agreed to build a wall. If Lav Shmei Hezek, then the only reason why they're being compelled to build a wall is because they both consented to the wall, which means it could be as big as you want. But when Lav Shmei Hezek, the Shmei Hezek, not that the Mishnah is limited to 4 amas, less than 4 amas each, but it's even 4 amas each, as we're going to learn in the Gemara later. Okay, so the Gemara asks, so when the Mishnah says the word "badnes hakois" to build a wall, the Gemara asks, "Pshita, it's obvious. Where else did you build it? Building in the middle, of course. It's obvious. Where else are you building it?" Says the Gemara, no, not so obvious. Tzricha, we require to have this din specifically state, the Mishnah states specifically it's built in the middle, because there is a case in which I might assume that you don't build in the middle. Namely, the Kadam Chad, one of the two partners, comes first, and appeases his friend. He appeases his friend. So we're going to see Rashi in a minute what that means. So one of the HaShutfin appeased the other Shutef and convinced him to join this partnership, whatever it is, or to split the partnership, or convinced him to build a wall. So Ma'adatema, I might have thought, because one person is convincing the other, Motzi Amale, the one who was convinced, might say to the guy who convinced him, Ki yisratzi lach, when did I agree to you? Ba'avida, I agreed to have a wall go and ruin the view and ruin the air, literally. Avida means the air. But tashmisa, but with use, that is to say, that I'm going to lose some space in my property, because now I have to give you 3 tefachim for your wall, or 2 tefachim for the wall, or a tefach and a half for the wall, whatever the sizes are in the Mishnah. Lo yisrat lach, that I didn't agree to. So Kamash Malon, therefore the Mishnah comes and says it's got to be in the middle, even if one guy convinced the other guy, and the other guy who is convinced says I didn't agree to lose my property space. Okay, so let's look at Rashi. Let's see, what did one friend appease the other friend to do? And what's the one who just got appeased, what's his argument to say that I didn't agree to give up on my property? I only agreed to give up on my airspace. And that's the argument that the Mishnah has to counter by saying, no, you got to build it in the middle. Right? This is all what we would have thought, the Hava Amina. Right? So let's see. It says Rashi, he requested of his friend to divide the property with a partition. So that's what one appeased the other. One came to the other and said, they're HaShutfin, they're partners, right? So they own the shared property. And then one comes to the other and says, let's divide the property with a partition. That's what he agreed to. He agreed to making a partition. He agreed to splitting and to making a partition. So says the Gemara, Madatema, I might have thought that Amar Lei, that the one who is convinced into it can say to the other person, now looking at Rashi, when I agreed to build this partition, the partition that I agreed to is the mechitza dakod nisatzi. I agreed to a thin partition. And I was okay blocking the view and blocking the airspace, the airflow in my property. Going, for example, shall nisodim, if we were to use planks, just the nisodim are like beams or planks of wood, 2x4s, whatever, shidakam, which are very thin, and the hezekriya ainbo, and therefore there won't be any damage of you seeing hezekriya because there's a partition. Then that's what I was okay with. Or alternatively, if you want to build a big wall, let it come out of your side. I'm willing to give a small little amount on my property. But to make a very thick stone wall, to diminish my usage, I didn't agree. So looking at this Rashi, which Lishna is the Gemara asking the question Pshita? The Gemara asks it's obvious to build in the middle. Is that in accordance to the one's Hezek Shmei Hezek or Hezek Lash Shmei Hezek? Which opinion is the Gemara asking Pshita that's obvious? Oh, so Lachor is saying Hezek Shmei Hezek. That's what I think at least. Because he says, Rashi.
Unless someone has a personal preference that he wants to block that for him is short.
Look, right, but in that case, what did he ask him? Lacholka mechitza, to divide. In other words, first of all, there's a bikesh lachol. I'm not sure, but let's just say, what does lacholka mean? To divide our properties. First,
what's he appeasing?
Right. So look at Rashi. Bikesh meno lacholka mechitza. He appeased him to make a division with a wall. That means we could have made one, not a wall. But you somehow, I agreed.
So in dividing the property, if Lashmei has accepted, I'd like to divide the property and put up a wall. He says, yes, I agree.
I didn't think of the Rashi that way before, but maybe that's correct way of thinking about
Agreed
it.
to put it up. But then the Mishnah is saying, okay, but you can't just agree to put it up. When you're agreeing to the whole thing. It needs to be a full wall.
But my question to you is, if Lav Shmei Hezek, why can't I say I never agreed to a wall bigger than a planks of wood? Why can't I say that? If Lav Shmei Hezek, and the entirety of the premise for compelling one person to the other is because we agreed. So it all comes down to our agreement. Does it not?
That's what the Mishnah is saying.
Unless
it's compelling in case. Just like it's not
what was the terms of our right, but it could be a misbis if we agree to it. Right? If Lav Shmei Hezek. It all comes down to what we agree to. Unless you're going to say that the Gemara is telling us here the same thing as the Gemara's answer later, right? The Gemara asks, if they agree to it, then why can't they just retract? It says, Kishikona Miyade, they made a kinyan with each other, right? So whatever the terms of the kinyan is, that's the kinyan.
That's not this case.
Right? Over here, it seems like, that's why I understood the Rashi to mean it's a question on Hezek or Shmei Hezek. And therefore,
it have to be in a case where it's smaller than 8 ounces.
Yeah, that's the Mishnah's case anyway. He comes to him and says, look, we're going to divide and make a wall. And he says, look, I was happy to divide if it meant that I'm not going to lose half my property.
Yeah.
Or 2 tefach of my property.
3.5 ounces anyway.
So I'm going to lose now 2 tefach of my property, I'm not interested. And if you're worried about Hezekriya, put up a board. That's the way I understood Rashi. But now I'm thinking about it, maybe you're right. Maybe it's the other way. I could see Rashi being understood both ways. Okay, that's good.
No, but if the case of the Mishnah is, you're right. If the case of the Mishnah is less than 8 ounces anyway, then it fits.
Yeah, well, for sure, if it's Hezek or Shmei Hezek, the Mishnah is definitely less than 4 amos each. Okay, I'm not sure. Let's see. Let's look at Tosafos. So Taisa says, Lamanda Amar Guda Parach. This question is asked only in accordance to the one who says that Mechitza means a Guda, means a partition, and therefore the Mishnah is saying Lash Mehezek, and the Mishnah is saying HaShutfin Shirotzu Lases Mechitza, Shutfin that wanted to make a separation, and Mechitza means Guda, so the Lechatchila wanted to make a wall. That's when we're asking Pshita. Why? So he's going to explain. And this is going to follow the line of all the questions we're about to ask. You see right after the Gemoro we just finished, there's a parenthesis that says Simin Gina Koisel Koifin V'Chalkin Chalukas Chalanis Rav Nachman in the Gemara. That's 5 different questions the Gemara is going to raise in accordance to the opinion that says Lash Mehezek. And it would make sense because the Gemara just finished substantiating that opinion. Later the Gemara is going to go with the other one, that's Mehezek, the Lishna Achina, and 1 0. I'm saying B'chlal, when there are 4 and 5, we always go with the one that, I was making that a statement as a klal. That when you have more questions, with less questions, you go with the halakha, the 4 questions. But now these are the 5 questions the Gemara is going to ask on this opinion, Lash Mehezek. The opinion of Shmei Hezek, the Gemara is going to get to on the top of the next page. Going to analyze that one. But for now, the Gemara just finished substantiating the opinion Lash Mehezek. So if the Gemara goes right to Pshita, it would follow that the Gemara is asking on the same opinion. Now Lash Mehezek, and what they agreed to was not the partition. They agreed to, what they agreed to is not to divide the property. They agreed to making the wall. Right, because mechitza is guda. So our shutfin should also last as mechitza. Mechitza equals wall. So partners that wanted to make a wall. That's what they agreed to. Right? And that's why it's pshita, because you could agree to it. Why? Obviously you're building it. You guys agreed to it. As we're going to learn in the Tosafos, which is kind of what I was asking on Rashi. It's obvious. You guys made an agreement that you're going to build a wall. So of course you're building a wall in the middle. You guys agreed to it. That's the pshita. Exactly. You agreed to it. Exactly. Which is, and it's a starker kasha on Rashi. Yeah. Right? So that's why I think that Rashi maybe is talking about the other opinion. Anyway, okay. So see, the Tosafos says, "Mandam good the parach." The Gemara is asking in accordance to the opinion that says that mechitza means a wall, and therefore it's lash mehezek, and therefore what the reason why they're being compelled in the Mishnah is because they agreed. And this is Kamoy Kahanech Pirkid Lakamon, and this is exactly like all the questions that are about to follow. The 5 questions the Gemara is going to ask on the opinion Lash Mehezek. And the reason why it's obvious, the reason why the Gemara says Pshita, the Kishikanu lasses, the Kishihiknu lasses Buddha, because you guys made a kinyan and agreed to building a wall. They each made it, they made it, the kinyan was that they're each going to give 50% of the wall. So why would one, and therefore obviously in the halfway, why would one guy have a claim to say, oh, we agreed to do 50-50, but I don't want to do 50-50? The whole thing comes down to your agreement. And once you make a kinyan, you can't back out of the agreement, right? So you made a kinyan to give 50%, so 50% includes part of the space. And now you're saying you can't? That's why it's pshita. That's a good question. It's a very good question. So Taka, what's the answer according to Tosafos? When I made you have to say it, that he's arguing and saying that when I made the kinyan with you, I only had in mind losing the airspace. That's what you're gonna have to say. He's trying to change the terms of the kinyan. Exactly. So if, let's say we're learning in Rashi, the Gemara is asking on the opinion of Pshita of Shmei Hezek. So then the Gemara is asking, it's obvious to go 50-50 because you're each responsible for. The Gemara is asking, it's obvious because you're each responsible for stopping the other person from seeing you. So you've got to do 50-50. So answer the Gemara that no. One guy told me, okay, let's split, and when we split, we're gonna have to build a wall. And the other guy said, okay, I'm okay splitting and building a wall. And then he says, oh, when I agreed to split and then be compelled to build a wall, it was only to throw a small wall. Because I never made a kinyan on building a wall. I only agreed to split the property, and splitting the property comes along with preventing hezek re'iyah. And therefore, in my mind, preventing hezek re'iyah was an inch. I didn't know I was going to have to give 8 inches. If you go to Hezek, Shmei Hezek, he never made a kinyan. No, but he agreed to splitting property. If Hezek, Shmei Hezek, he only agrees to split property. Because once the property is split, one guy can compel the other guy to build a wall. So the Ratsu is only on the Lechalka. That's what I'm saying. Big, yeah. Not Bikish Mino Livnes Kaiso. Bikish Mino Lechalka, like to divide the property with a wall. He says, okay, let's split our property with a wall in the middle. And the guy says, no problem, I'm happy to do that. And then he finds out he's got to give up 5 inches of his wall, of his property. He's like, man, interested. In Tosis, it's like a shver. They both agreed to build a wall. They made a kinyan. So what's the other guy arguing? And what's the Havamin? Rashi Tosis makes the question Pshita so good that the Ma'al Tema doesn't really stand up to it. The Pshita is so good. It's so obvious. You guys agreed, made a kinyan to build a wall in the middle. So what's the Ma'al Tema? It's a good question. Don't know the answer. I didn't see anything in my short Maran. Let me just look at the. They have in the back there sometimes places Perek or places Sivid. Explain.
It's interesting, but because it's almost like they're being compelled. Pointing is the case of the episode. That's like almost this.
Right. You're saying, well, it's not a question on Tosis, it's a question on that Lishna.
Yeah.
It's a good question. And maybe even the Gemara's first question is going to be that. Ulai. Maybe you can even touch that into the first question the Gemara's going to ask. Because what you could say right now is the Gemara, you're right, that's why it's Pshita. That's why it's Pshita. Because right now, if let's just look at this. If Lav Shmei Hezek, what's the din of the Mishnah? The din of the Mishnah is to follow the custom, to hold in. Right? If you made a kinyan to build a wall, we don't know what kind of wall to build. Follow the minhag. Right? And then we give different types of walls, and we tell you measurements for walls, because especially if you follow Tosafos' opinion that says that if it's less than that size, it's a bad minhag. Right? So that's another din in the Mishnah that you have that if you're building this kind of wall, it has to be XYZ size. But the burden of Sakaiso is not part of the din, and therefore it's pshita. Whereas if Hezek Shmei Hezek, then burden of Sakaiso is the din. Burden of Sakaiso be'emtza is the din. The din is you have to build a wall in the middle because of Hezek Riyah. So the pshita is in the emtza part. Because where else did you put it? Answer. At least that's if we're going with Rashi, in the way we're understanding Rashi. Maybe we're wrong with our understanding. Misunderstanding of Rashi. Answer. We only agreed to when we split. Our building a wall is only because we agreed to split, not because you forced me because it's less than 4 amos each, right? And because I agree, because you came to me asking me if I want to split, I was okay with splitting and putting up a partition, but I wasn't okay with giving up 3 tvachim. And I never made a kinyan on that either. I only agreed to the splitting part, which comes along. Sorry? No, because Hezek Shmei Hezek finished. Because Hezek Shmei Hezek, you have to build a wall in the middle. Too bad. These words Hezek Ein Ba is bothering me. Let's say Rashi didn't say the word Hezek. Let's just say it was Lav Shmei Hezek, right? In Rashi. So read the Rashi without those words Hezek. So I would have thought, let's just say Hezek is Lav Shmei Hezek, right? So Kadam Chad Ratzi Chad Menei Lechavre Bikish Menu Lechokam Mechitza. One friend says, let's put up a wall. And the other guy says, okay, and they made a kinyan. Right? That's the Gemara's opinion. That's the Gemara. Now, the other guy, so I might have thought, Amalei, the guy's going to say to him, when I took a kinyan and agreed with you to make a wall, when I made that kinyan, I had in mind a thin wall. And that way I would lose my vision or whatever, the air. Going, for example, if it's planks of wood. Shidak, which is very thin. Or I agreed that the thickness of the kosh should be on your part, except for a small bit of my part. I will look this but to build this thick wall, to block also my usage, but it's never agreed to it. What would be a problem with that, Rashi, if it didn't say there's words Hezekiriyah Emba? What would be wrong with that? And what would be wrong if Rashi was talking, if Rashi's learned the Pshita, the question of Pshita is on the opinion of Lashman Hezek Tosafos. So Rashi could have wrote the whole Rashi without saying the words of Hezekiriyah Emba. What would have been missing? What would have been missing? Maybe what would have been missing is like something you were saying. That what's the svara to say that the reason why I agreed to a wall is only a thin wall? The svara is only because the other guy's concerned about me seeing him. So even if it isn't Hezekiriyah, you're concerned with Hezekiriyah. And therefore, I say, okay, you're concerned with Hezekiriyah, so we'll put something to block that. Even though Hezekiriyah is not an actual Hezek.
It's not an actual Hezek, so you can't take
so I could have rejected.
Because of your problem.
Right. So I could have rejected it. But because he made a kinyan, too bad. That's kind of what Tosafos is saying. So maybe you could learn Rashi like Tosafos.
Right, but then my problem with Tosafos there is the agreement is on the answer. The Tosafos doesn't jive with the precise lashon of the Mishnah. The Ratsu is less safe, but it's a bit.
Yeah, that's a question on the Lishna anyway, even without Tosafos. That's a good question. That's a question on the Lishna of B'chal, Lashman Hezek. That Boinus HaKoisel isn't part of the din, which is the Gemara's question Pshita.
Right.
That's the Gemara's question Pshita. Boinus HaKoisel's position as a din, when seemingly it's not the din, it's part of your agreement. Therefore, Tosafos said, and that's why it's Pshita. And if this is Malatema, I would have thought that the agreement wasn't exact like that. The guy's going to argue. And the key here is that they didn't both come to consensus. There's one guy appeasing the other. That's what the Mishnah phrase, the Gemara phrases it. One guy's appeasing the other, which means one guy I'm agreeing to some issue you have. And then when I find out you want much more, I say, hold on a second, I didn't know you wanted that much. I only wanted this much. Right? That's the way it comes out from what Tosafos is saying. But says the Gemara, Chiddush din, because you agreed, too bad. You got to build it in the middle. Because you made a kinyan. But let's go even further in Tosafos, you'll see even more. Now, Tosafos can explain further why he doesn't think the Pshita is a good question for Hezekiriyah Shema Hezek, but for completely the opposite reason that I said. I was saying, like in Rashi, that the reason why it's Pshita by Hezekiriyah Shema Hezek is because if you're both damaging each other, so you have to build in the middle, right? But Tosafos is actually saying the reverse. But one who says that mechitza means division, and therefore, what did they want? They didn't want the wall. They wanted to separate properties. They want to split their property. And therefore, once they split the property, one person is compelling the other to build a wall because Hezekiriyah is a Hezek. So it's Tichlemema. Over there, it's not Pshita. Over there, Boinus HaKoisel is not Pshita. And it's Tichlemema, you must say it. And the Gemara is not even asking Pshita according to that opinion, because it's not Pshita. Why is it not Pshita? I would have thought that Mishum Hezekiriyah, that if it was just a question of Hezekiriyah, then Yesh L'Sayim Binyan HaKoisel. Then all I have to do is participate in. I'll say this. You have a problem with me seeing you. I don't have a problem with you seeing me. But it doesn't have to come out of my property. So I'm damaging you. It's right. So I got to pay. I have to contribute to the wall. But I have to give you property now also. Why? I don't care if you see me. Right? And that's the Chiddush they did. Right? But this is for sure not like Rashi, because no matter how you learn Rashi, look what Rashi said. Except for a little bit. Now, Rashi is saying no matter how you slice it, I have to give at least something to the property. What Tosafos is saying that the Havamina was, if we say Hezekiriyah Shema Hezek, then without the din of Boinus HaKoisel, I would have thought that the person who doesn't care for Hezekiriyah would say to the other guy, build the whole thing in your wall and I'll pay for part of it. Rashi doesn't even go with that. Rashi says at least a little bit I have to give. Because otherwise what am I agreeing to? What am I contributing? I have to give something. Which is right there telling me that Rashi is going with the Lishna that Hezekiriyah Shema Hezek. Following? Following? Let's trace this again. His last words. Now, but according to the opinion that plukta, according to the opinion which says that mechitza means separate property, divide our property, and therefore that's what they consented to. They consented to separate the property because it's less than 4 amos each. And now the wall is being built because to prevent Zakriya. So in this case, it's not so pshita that you have to build in the middle. And therefore, the Mishnah must tell us because it's not so obvious. Why is it not so obvious? I might have thought, had the Mishnah not told me that if the only reason for building the wall was to prevent the Hazakriya, then one neighbor has to help with the other neighbor. In other words, the one who doesn't care for it has to help the one who does care for it. The building the wall. But I don't have to build it on my property because it has Zakriya. That's what I would have thought if not to burn the according to Rashi, Tosafos. Yeah. Sorry? They agreed to divide. If one guy compels the other. If one guy comes and claims, if one guy says, look, you're damaging me, I want a wall. So then I can, sorry? Then if they both don't care to see each other, that's fine. They can both be moichel on their hezek. But one guy comes and says, no, what he goes. But by the law of no, I'm compelling the other person because there is such a thing as you are currently damaging me, and that's why I'm compelling you to pay to prevent the damage. That's why I can compel. Sorry. Yes. That you see me now. So that it's not inherent in division. It's inherent if one person feels that's a problem. Oh, exactly. So what does the other guy say now? No, that's fair if I'm not damaging you. If I'm actually damaging you, I'm responsible to stop the damage I'm doing to you, right? So if Torah considers the damage of vision as an actual damage, then my vision, I'm damaging you every day when I walk out of my property. So therefore, you can compel me to pay for it. So Tosafos is saying, and if the Mishnah not explicitly stated build a wall in the middle, we would have assumed, we could have concluded that when you come to me and say you're damaging me, pay for 50% of the wall, I would respond and say no problem, build it on your property, I'll give you 50%. That's what Tosafos is saying. Whereas Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says, I would give a minimum. 50% of the cost, but a minimum of the space. Or just put up thinner boards if you want. Right? Which further makes it seem like it's because of Hezek Re'iyah. If there's no Hezek Re'iyah, then we make a kinyan, and it's also taka pshita. The question why the Gemara doesn't. See, you're stuck either way because whether you go with Rashi, let's say you go with the way we're reading Rashi, which could be completely wrong. Let's say we're going with this way of reading Rashi. That Rashi is asking the question pshita according to the opinions that says Zikrish Mehezek. You have to ask the question: if Lash Mehezek, why isn't that pshita? Why isn't that pshita if Lash Mehezek? It is pshita. You guys agreed. It's pshita also, right? And the main reason in Rashi to assume that's actually talking about Lash Mehezek is because the Gemara just concluded the Lash Mehezek is the correct reading of the Mishnah. That's the Gemara just concluded. Even though we know from Tosafos it's not the halacha, and we're going to find out later there's another reading of the Gemara in the Mishnah. But the Gemara at this point in the Gemara just concluded that the correct reading is Lash Mehezek. So therefore we must learn like Adam is learning that you came to me and said, let's build a wall because I don't like you looking at me. And I said, okay, I'm happy to split to contribute to that, but not so much. Because why not so much? Oh, because you came to me complaining I'm looking at you all the time. So I said, no problem, let's put a partition. And then you came to me with a $100,000 bill for a fancy wall. I said, excuse me, I only wanted a $50 wall.
And so that's why it's not necessarily pshita, and that's why we need financial.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you agree, but you're not so clear on it's not so clear what you agreed upon, the default is the answer. If If you haven't made a kinyan, because they could in theory make a kinyan, okay, fine, I'm gonna state straight out right away that it's gonna be on your property or it's gonna be in very.
Right.
But if you don't say that.
That's the problem. If Lav Shmei Hezek and their agreement was not explicitly to do 50-50, why should they talk to 50-50?
Yeah.
You're stuck either way.
So then the dean is, you do.
But why? If our agreement is stipulated 70-30.
So
Okay,
right,
there's obviously no contract. There's a kinyan, there's no contract.
There's a kinyan, or it stipulates that there's a case, it doesn't stipulate where it is.
All right.
The
Okay.
dean is its benefit.
Okay, yeah.
That's why it's not shita, because they didn't stipulate where it is. But the guy says, hey, I had in mind it was going to be on your property, not on my property. So that's why the Mishnah tells them. No, it's bad stuff.
So why did Kadam Chad V'Ratz L'Chavere? Tzricha, the Kadam Chad V'Ratz L'Chavere. One guy came, in other words, like this: if they both agreed simultaneously, certainly it's going to be 50-50. But because only one person's agreeing, because the other guy.
Because the one who came and asked, the other guy, the guy response says, yes, I'll build a face. But he's not explicit in what he wants, but he can make the argument at least after, I agree it wasn't going to, or I had in mind it wasn't going to be on, that's the case of document. I had in mind it wasn't going to be on my property.
But what was the agreement to? What did I appease you to do? To build a wall or to split? But that's not what Rashi says, though. I appeased you to split property with a mechitza. That's why I'm saying Hezek. That plus the fact that Rashi in the next thing says Vehezek Ein Ba, which is a Vishtaka Kasha on Rashi. Why the Gemara is asking Pshita now when the Gemara has not? The Gemara has just concluded that Lav Shmei Hezek. Why is it asking a Pshita on the other opinion? It's a Vishtaka Kasha on Rashi. But the Gemara flows very well in that sense because the Malutema makes a lot of sense. It's obviously built in the middle. Answer: not always, because the consent was not on the wall. The consent was on the split. So when I consented to split, I knew a wall was coming. But what I consented to really was the splitting of it. And now that I found out that splitting of it means a much bigger wall, I'm like, hold on a second, it's too big. So the Gemara answer is, no, Kamash Malon, that once you agree to split, and because of Hezekiah, you have to build a full-on wall. Finished. Right? But the problem is in the flow of the Gemara, because the Gemara just concluded that Lav Shmei Hezek.
Right, and Lav Shmei Hezek, you're building wall that you agreed on.
That's right, which is why Tosafos says that's a pshita. Okay, let's go weiter in the Gemara. Siman Gina Koisel Koifin V'Cholkin Chaloines Rav Nachman. So this is a Siman. Sorry, Gemara asks the Hezek Lav Shmei Hezek. Is Hezek not considered a Hezek? Question mark. You just concluded minus 3 speed lines in the Gemara, because it's so strange these 3 lines in the Gemara come in here. It seems to belong like on the next page. Like when the Gemara is finished discussing Shmei Hezek or not Shmei Hezek, then you ask this question Pshita, but the Gemara asks a question Pshita here now, which is like very strange. So Tosafos says, okay, it's part of the list of questions. Right? Now, if that's the case, why isn't the Pshita put after this little statement? A suggested answer may be to follow. I was thinking about that today, but it's still a little bit strange that it's here. Anyway, the Gemara asks, Hezek Lav Shmei Hezek. Is Hezek not a Hezek? That's the concluding reading of the Gemara. So Siman Gina Koisel Koifin Cholkin Chalonis Rav Nachman. The Gemara is going to ask now, 6 questions. One is going to be from Gina, one's going to be from a Mishnah that starts the word Koisel, one's going to be from Koifin, one's going to be from Cholkin, one's going to be from Chalonis, and one's going to be from Rav Nachman. 6 questions that are about to come. It's interesting that the Gemara introduces it this way. These are the questions that Tosafos said earlier in the previous Tosafos, when Tosafos said that the halacha is Hezek Shmei Hezek, and Tosafos said, and the reason why I'm saying that is because the Gemara is going to ask a bunch of questions on Lav Shmei Hezek. These are the questions Tosafos is referring to, and he says that all the answers the Gemara gives here are deflections. That's what Tosafos said in the Gemara, in the Tosafos of Ruah that we learned in the Mishnah, that we learned last week, a few weeks ago. The answer the Gemara is going to give to all these questions to substantiate the opinion of Lav Shmei Hezek is deflections. That's what Tosafos told us, which is why Tosafos said the conclusion is Shmei Hezek. So, question 1 from the word Gina. Tashma, come and listen. And this is so funny that it's not funny. Rashi does not have any explanation to the question. Tosafos does, but Rashi doesn't. And we have to think about why that is. Okay, so Tashma, come and listen. Our Mishnah says, right after it says the din of Chatzar, it says, V'chein begina, the same thing is true in a gina. That in a place where, right, the Mishnah said the custom is that if the place is, V'chein begina, likewise in a gina, Makom Shenagol Ligder, where the custom is to put a fence around the garden, Machayv say you compel them to build a garden. Okay, and that's a question, that's a challenge to the position of Lashmi Hezek. How's that a challenge? How's that a challenge? These words, V'chein begina. How's it a challenge? To the opinion Lashmi Hezek, yeah. Those two words, V'chein begina. The next word, Gina, is an answer already. Gina shiny. Gina is different. What's the question? So let's see Tosafos, because Rashi doesn't give an explanation. We'll look right at Tosafos to see his Tosafos explanation. And then when we're done, we're going to come back to Rashi and see how Rashi might learn the Gemara a little differently. So Tosafos, Tashma, come and listen, V'chein begina. The Kalman later, Maskina, the Gemara is going to conclude that when the Mishnah says that the law applies to a gina as well, it means like this: Stam, that a gina which has no custom, kim makam shenagu ligder, should be treated as if it's a place that does have a custom to build a wall. So in other words, if the local custom is not to build a wall, you don't build a wall. If the local custom is to build a wall, certainly build a wall. If the local custom is neither, if there is no local custom, so that when the Mishnah says V'chein begina, the Mishnah is telling you that if you're in a location which has no particular custom, then treat it as if it has a custom to build a wall. Now, if that's the case, then Hilchach, therefore, Da'ik Shapit, the Gemara rightfully points out the Hezekriya, Shmei Hezek, that Hezekriya is a Hezek. Because why would a place which has, in other words, if it was a question of agreement, then if there's no custom, why are we making them build a wall? If there's a custom, then you could say, okay, there's a custom, so you have to follow the custom, and once you agree, you have to. But if no custom, why are we treating it as if it's a place that is a custom? It all comes down to your agreement. Sorry? The Gemara later in Davdal Damal Aleph. Right. So it says, based on what the Gemara is going to conclude later, that when the Mishnah says V'chein begina, it means that a location which does not have a particular custom, you should treat it as if it has the custom to build a wall. And that's a proof that when there's that we're concerned about visuals, because even if there's no custom, we're still making you build a wall. No, it's Hezek Shmei Hezek. This is proving Shmei Hezek. I can coerce him, even though there's no minhag. That's correct. Even if no minhag, as long as there's no minhag against it, then I can compel you. That's what I have, Hezek Shmei Hezek. Right? That's what Tosafos understands the question. Says the Gemara, back to the Gemara. Gina shiny. No, a garden is different. A garden is different. Why? Yes. The Gemara says V'chein begina, which is proving that Shmei Hezek says the Gemara Gina shiny, a garden is different. There's a different reason why we don't want people to see each other's gardens. Not because the Hezek is damaged, but because of a different issue. Because Rabbi Abba, like Rabbi Abba said, it's forbidden for a person to stand in a field. It's forbidden for someone to stand in the field of his friend or next to the field of his friend when the person's field is in full bloom, when all of the stock are standing in their full growth. Why? Because of Ayin Hara. So the fact that in a Gina we're compelled to build a wall is not because of Hezekriya, but because of you don't want to give an Ayin Hara. Like Rashi says, Shalei is a kind of Ayin Hara. But the Gemara says, but you said, and so too, which means whatever law applies to the Gina also applies to the Chatzar. And in the Chatzar, there isn't any issue of Ayin Hara, because there's no one's growing any stuff there. It's only in the Gina that you have an issue of Ayin Hara. So why V'chein? Says the Gemara, Agvil L'Gazis. When it says v'chein, it means in the result, on the resulting what type of wall, but not on the actual svara behind it. But Rashi says like this. Rashi says like this. V'chein katani. The mashma, the implication is tervayu chataymahu gina v'chotzer. They're both for the same reason. Both the same reason. And the Gemara rejects it by saying no, it means like a gazes, which again, this is Tosafos says is a deflection. Okay. Now, let's pause it. Sorry. The Gemara's answer. Agvil v'gazes. Look at the lashon in the Mishnah. V'chein begina makom shenago live there. Mechayven oisai. Where this is the first time the Gemara mentioned the word mechayven. Until now, it's been rotzim.
And it's also tied to that they dwell
That was Rashi's reading, that they dwell there, which is why they have more activity there, right? That's what Rashi said. But because it's a chata, they have more activity there. But the first time the Mishnah uses the words chiyuv is on ginna. Before then, the Mishnah used the words rotzi. There was all consent, right? So it seemed from Tosafos, right? I have Tosafos explain the question. Because later we're going to find out that when you have no minute, you can compel each other. There's the raya that hezek lishmei hezek. So where's the Gemara's question from? From the words mechayven oisai, not from the words v'chein begina. The question is really coming from mechayven oisai. Right?
But in the Mishnah, the typing way is just when there's a minute to do it, right?
No, it says even there's no minute. Right? That's what Tosafos is saying. That the Gemara, if it's a minute, then there would be no question. But based on the fact that the Gemara quote concludes later that when there is no minute, we treat it as if there's a minute to build. So where's the question coming from? Not from the words v'chein begina, but from the words mechayven oisai, which the Gemara doesn't quote. Which is perhaps why Rashi doesn't learn the Gemara this way, especially since we'll see the next Gemara. Let's go look at one more question. Next question in the Gemara. Toshma, come in here. So this is the continuation of our Mishnah, but in the Gemara it's only printed in the Mishnah and Daf Hey, but it's the continuation of the same Mishnah, which says, Kaisel, Chatzer, a wall that was in a Chatzel, Shanafa that fell, Mechayven oisei livnois. They're compelled to build Adal Amas up until Dal Amas. So they had a 10 amas wall between each other, and the wall fell. So the halacha is, says the Mishnah, that you're compelled to rebuild the wall up to 4 amas. Now look at Rashi. Mechayven oisai. We compel him to build. V'hacha loikaton rotzim. And here we don't say rotzim. Elal karchai, but against his will. Is that a raya that hezek lishmei hezek? Rashi says that here, not on v'chein begina. He didn't say it by v'chein begina. This pirush of mechayven oisai, because now the Gemara says the words mechayven oisai. By v'chein begina, the Gemara didn't say the word. The Gemara says v'chein begina, and that's somehow a question. Go figure it out. So Tosafos says it's based on the Gemara later, which is going to say that begina is also treated, and therefore mechayven oisai, and therefore it's a raya that hezek lishmei hezek. But the Gemara doesn't say the words v'chein oisai, just as v'chein begina as a question. Rashi doesn't explain the words v'chein begina. But later, when the Gemara does quote the words mechayven oisai, then Rashi explains the words mechayven oisai teach you that it's shmei hezek, because otherwise, why are you compelling? There's no ratzu. They didn't consent. The wall was built by people before them, right? So the Gemara answers, no, not fall shiny. When it falls, it's different, because the wall was there before, and therefore it's a different law, and that's why we're compelling them to rebuild it. Why, says Rashi? Why nashal shiny? Because the original owners already agreed to build the wall. And because they agreed to build the wall, therefore the new owners are also compelled to build the wall. Why the new owners held up to the issues of the old owners? Good kasha, all the Mefarshim asked that. And Tosafos is going to give a different explanation for that reason.
Like a real right that's time to the land.
Somehow it's like a grandfather in. The wall has to be there. So they're compelled to build it up to 4 amas. But and therefore it's not because of hezek lishmei hezek, but only because they've already been tied to this wall because of the previous landowners. Says the Gemara now, the guy who asked the question, what was he thinking? Of course, a wall that fell is different. The guy who asked the question, what was he thinking? Right, all of the Gemara is a hodgepodge of conversations. So the Gemara is now analyzing, what was the guy thinking when he asked the question from a case of where a wall fell. You're comparing a case where a wall fell where there is no wall. Of course, a wall falling is different. There's already a standing obligation. So what was he thinking when he asked the question? So says the Gemara, what he was thinking was that the Mishnah was only needed sefer itztachalei. That really the din of the Mishnah there applies even if the wall was never built, that you're compelled to build. And the reason why the Mishnah used the example of nafal, a wall that fell, is for the next clause in the Mishnah, which is that he's not responsible, that once it fell, you're not responsible to rebuild it the whole 10 amas or 12, 15, whatever it was, only 4. But really, the din of building 4 even applies if it didn't, even if it was never built to begin with. And that's what he was thinking that's what he was thinking why the Mishnah used the case of a wall that fell, but not because it's exclusive to a wall that fell. But in our opinion, it's exclusive to when a wall falls, because if there never was a wall, it's only if they both agree to do so. Because Lashme has it. Yeah? Clear? So let's look at it from the questioner's perspective and from the guy who asked the question's perspective. The questioner is challenging because his opinion is Hezek Rish Hezek. And because his opinion is Hezek Rish Hezek, you always have to build a wall, whether there was a wall before or not build a wall before. If one person wants it, you both got to build. Yeah? And therefore, when the Mishnah later gives an example of a wall that fell, and therefore they're obligated to rebuild it, their obligation doesn't stem from the fact that it fell. Their obligation stems from the fact that their neighbors damaging each other by seeing each other. That's the obligation stems. Why did the Mishnah use the example of a fallen wall? To tell you that you don't have to rebuild it to the full extent of the previous wall. All you need to do is build it to 4 amas, which prevent seeing each other. That was the questioner's position. The people who are answering are saying, no. When the Mishnah said we compel them to rebuild the wall, it's only because it fell. If it never fell, if it was never a wall, not obligated unless you want, because Lashme has it. That's the answer's opinion. That's the answer's opinion. Clear? Okay, so now let's try to think. I'm just suggesting this. A very simple way of understanding the question, v'chein begina. Just from the 2 words v'chein begina, you have the question already. Very posh. It's so simple. I think the Rashi didn't have to say it. That's why it's so obvious. If Hezek Reish Malash Me Hezek, then why are they compelled to build a wall? Because they both agreed. So, and we did a kinyan with each other. So what's the difference if it's a chatzar, it's a gina, it's a bika? Who cares? You made a kinyan. So had the Mishnah not said v'chein begina, and the Mishnah used the example of a chatzar, I might have said, okay, a chatzar just because that's most common. But now you're telling me v'chein begina, what that means is, no. Chatzar for sure you have to build a wall, and also gina you have to build a wall. If it's all come down to your agreement, then it's just universal. Gina, bika, wall, who cares? You agree, you made a kinyan to build a wall. You got to build a wall. So and that's why the Gemara doesn't say the word b'chayv noisai. Because that's not where the question is coming from. The question is coming from the very fact that the Mishnah actually makes a second clause of gina. Why b'chal make a second clause? If you agree, build a wall. You don't agree, you don't have to build a wall. What b'chein begina? And right there. Exactly. Shouldn't that agree, make a kinyan to build a wall, you build a wall, but it doesn't matter what your property is. So the very fact that the Gemara introduces another case, b'chein begina, that's already a question. It's a very strong question. And if the Gemara asks, no, Dina Shaini, because Dina Taka is different din. The first din was because you agreed. The second din, the Dina, is because there's a next separate issue of Ayin Hara. And if when the Gemara asks, but the Gemara asked what v'chein katani, says Rashi, the mashma, that's one tam. 2 dinim for the same reason. That's what v'chein implies. Right? Because the word v'chein means that the reason you used before is not only there, but also here. If it's a question of ratzu, then for sure it carries over. You don't have to say v'chein begina. So you're saying there's a new din? So why saying v'chein b'chlal? She says, oh, v'chein just because of the wall episode. Now it's like a deflection.
V'chein, you build a wall too.
Yeah. Now the question becomes on Tosafos. Why doesn't Tosafos think this way? Such a good things. So, good kasha. But ulai, okay, when we finish these questions, maybe you're running out of time. Okay, we'll see also another Tosafos, Nafal Shiny. Oh, let's look at the Tosafos, Nafal Shiny. This is beautiful. This will mamish give us clarity. Okay, so the Rashi said that why is a wall that fell different? Why is a wall that fell different? Because the original owners already agreed. And because the original owners already agreed, therefore that agreement carries over. So there's a lot of very strong questions on this Rashi. First of all, why are we compelled to uphold an agreement made by previous owners? Number one. Number two, if we are being compelled because of the previous owners, why only 4 Amos? It should be the whole thing. Rebuild the whole thing. Why only 4 Amos? These are very starting questions. And therefore, Tosafos says, Nafal Shiny. Why is Nafal Shiny? Because they had a wall before, and they've become accustomed to doing private matters there. And they haven't learned to be comfortable with each other there, or to not do things that are private because it's open air. And that's why, so in other words, so Hezekiah does apply to them. Hezekiah really is Lashme Hezek. But because
but for them it's Shmei Hezek because they
objective thing. It becomes
so this is what I'm thinking of Tosafos, why Tosafos Taka says all these answers and deflections. Because we're going to see each of these questions and the answers will limit the scope of the people who say Lashme Hezek. The first limitation was on the fact that, okay, for Ein Hara, it is Shmei Hezek, number one. Number two, once you guys get comfortable, Hezek became Hezek now, because you got comfortable. Now you're Mechoyev. So it's mamish all deflection, because each one's going to add another layer of limiting the scope of how you say Lashme Hezek.
So then when is it Lashme Hezek already going to get?
Exactly. It's almost never. Because every other case is another time Lashme Hezek. I know because we got used to it. And you can see soon because it's my house, because it's public, a whole bunch of different reasons why Shmei Hezek. And Rashi doesn't say let's go with this, and this will explain, by the way, why, in Tosafos' opinion, even though the question Pshita is also in the same version, why it comes before that parentheses. Because the question Pshita is just a question on the Mishnah. These questions that follow are all challenges to your very opinion. Your whole opinion, Lashme Hezek, is being limited by one question after another. And that's why they're put into a separate category, and these are the deflection answers. The answers that are constantly limiting the scope of your opinion to begin with. First, by limiting it by saying, no, it doesn't apply to Ein Hara. And secondly, limits it by saying, once you got used to it, then Shmei Hezek does kick in. Like a subjective experience. And let's see one more question where you see the same thing the same thing. Okay, we skip one of the Tosafos and we'll come back to it maybe next week. Okay, no, actually, let's just do that Tosafos. Okay, so the Gemara said Gina shiny, Kedrababa. The Gemara said that a Gina is different because a Gina, there's a problem of Shmei Hezek because of Ein Hara. Says the Gemara, says Tosafos, Im Taimar, if so, Mahai Taimar for the same reason of Ein Hara, Yischayev Nami, we should also be obligated Nami Ligdar to build a wall, the Bika, in a open field, not just a garden, but also open field. That's a field that has wheat or some other grain. So why doesn't the Ein Hara apply there if it's an Ein Hara issue? He says that it says Shlemar might suggest the shiny Gina is different. Where vegetables are growing for eating. Vegetables and fruits are more often seen on the trees. But a field of grain in the middle there's only 1 month a year when you actually have the grain in its full glory. It gets cut down until next year it's a wasteland. And that's why it's once a month, for 1 month a year. And if we're not going to make it build a wall. But during that time, you can't stand there because it's taka and harder. Now we see Tosafos. We're going to see Tosafos is going to say a line, which if you remember the Rashi, the answer was already given. Then Tosafos asks, I might ask, according to the opinion that says Hezek Shmei Hezek, and HaShutfin should also last us mechitza. Mechitza means plukta. Mechitza means divided property, and that's what the consent was. The consent was to divide the property, and therefore once they can divide the property, one can compel the other to build because Shmei Hezek. Kivan dashminan, because the Mishnah told us that afilu b'chatzah Shmei Hezek, and even in the chatzah the Shmei Hezek, Kol shekain begina, certainly in a gina. Why is the Gemara saying kol shekain? Why is it saying kol shekain? Why is a gina kol shekain from a chatzar? Maybe, because Ein Hara. Now it's not introduced this notion of Ein Hara. Then conversely, a gina has two things: Hezekriya plus Ein Hara.
Well, the Hezekriya is the Ein Hara.
Or is Ein Hara? Yeah, yeah.
It's not privacy. It's your actual causing actual damage.
Yeah. And if the Gemara says, "Ask, why we have to say bechein begina?" It seems obvious. Says the Gemara, "V'yishleimar sataysis yishleimar itzrich bechein begina." You still need to say bechein begina. Lemistim mishum gvil v'gazis, because to tell you what kind of wall to build. I would say Rashi avoided this by saying, "Rav Tash mission is b'chatzir." So I would say.
Because they both have,
Yeah.
like you can't say one is a problem from the other. They're different. They're both
Maybe. Okay. Says like this. Next Tosafos, the Kari law, Mike, we saw the more not shiny. This is where Tosafos disagree with Rashi. Unlike Rashi, which said that the reason why they're building the chutz is because Shekar and Satzar were showing the B'kaisel. Something just rang a bell in my head. And Rashi and on the Mishnah, the Rashi the Fichach. So like the chiyuv comes from the chiyuv, the chachamim. Maybe that's why he's harkening back to the original people's share, the original people's agreement, because they agreed. Therefore, the takanas chachamim is imposed upon them, and if the takanas chachamim stays there, you're still stuck with the question of why only 4 amas. Why, if it's because of the consent of the original owners, then go all the way to however high they had it. You're still stuck with that question. Anyway. Okay, says Tosafos, with the Kari law, my Kari law. The Gemara asked, and what was the original person thinking? So all Rashi said was, did the questioner not know that a fallen wall is different than a wall that was up? Does the questioner not know that a fallen wall is different than a wall that was never there? That's all Rashi said. Tosafos elaborates a little bit more. Kalemar, this means to say, Shita the nafal shiny, obviously a wall that fell is different. But Adrabah, not only is this a raya for his opinion, Nezek Shmeir Shmei Hezek, but it's actually a raya the other way. He should have proven Midikatani v'nafal, because the Mishnah conditions the Muchayv and Oisei on the fact that it's nafal, Mechal, that would be implied, the Ba'alma, that ordinarily, where you never had a wall, Loish Mehezek, you don't have to do it. So the nafal could have proved the other way. That's what Tosafos saying. The fact that the Mishnah said nafal is proof the other way. We're trying to prove from the fact that it's Machayven Oisei, like Rashi said, right? Machayven Oisei means it doesn't say Rotzu, it says Machayven. Right. But Tosafos is saying the fact that the Mishnah says Nafal might have been arrived the other way. That the only time it's Machayven Oisei is when it's Nafal. Right? But this only works in Tosafos' opinion. In Tosafos' opinion, what's the chiyuv coming from? From Hezek Re'iyah, because they got accustomed to not seeing each other. And therefore, I could argue, only when you got accustomed to each other not seeing each other, that's when Machayven Oisei, but not Lav Hezek. That's why it can turn on an Adrabah. But in Rashi, where it's a question of the original, what's Nafal shining? Because the original guy's commitment, right? How does the Nafal turn it into an Adrabah proof? How does the Nafal? So I see why Nafal is different, because you had an original agreement. But how does that prove either Shmei Hezek or Lash Mehezek? Doesn't tell you either way. So you can't say an Adrabah in Rashi's view. The Adrabah only works in Tosafos' view. In Tosafos' view, where there's a stronger reason for Shmei Hezek in this case, that's why Adrabah. Shmei Hezek only when you got accustomed to it. Because Nafal. Following? Ulai. Okay, we got some clarity? Yeah.
Well, could you review what you said with the Rashi, with Rashi's opinion on what it
Okay.
does and doesn't prove?
So when the Gemara asked, what was the questioner thinking? Right? So when the Gemara asked that question, what the Gemara asking? So Rashi said the Gemara is asking, did the questioner not know that the wall fell? Or did he not know that a wall, that nafal is different, that a wall falling is different? That's all Rashi says. It doesn't say that the fact that the wall fell is a proof to the other way. Just says, did he not know that a fallen wall is different? Right, and in Rashi's view, why is a fallen wall different? Because there's an existing agreement from the previous owners. So did you not know that an existing agreement is different when there's no agreement? Okay. So it doesn't prove, in other words, at that point, it doesn't prove to you one way or the other. It could be Hezek Yesh Mehezek, it could be Hezek Yelash Mehezek. Right? But it's just not a raya.
Not necessarily. The existing agreement is on to build a wall, right?
Okay, so that doesn't tell you that there can't be new agreements. In other words, it doesn't tell you that Hezek Yesh Mehezek or Lash Mehezek. It doesn't tell you either. It just tells you that the fact that the wall fell gives it a different history and therefore different status. But it doesn't say what, it doesn't turn it around as a raya to say Lash Mehezek.
Why? Because if Shmei has it,
Yeah.
then they're already divided.
If Shmei Hezek, then Nafal is not shiny. Nafal is exactly like every other case. Right?
Exactly.
The chiddush is you don't have to go to 10 feet. You don't have to go to 10 amas. That's the opinion of the questioner. Right? The opinion of the questioner is Shmei Hezek. And because Shmei Hezek, the makshin, the questioner's opinion is Shmei Hezek. And because Shmei Hezek, therefore, therefore it makes a difference whether it fell or didn't fall. The chiddush of the Mishnah there is that when it fell and it used to be 10 amas, you don't have to go to 10 amas. You only go to 4 amas. Because all you have to do is Shmei Hezek. So but before the Gemara comes to that conclusion of that reading, the Gemara is asking the question, what were you thinking? Did you not realize that fallen wall is different? You knew fallen wall is different. But what makes a fallen wall different in Rashi's opinion? Because they had a previous agreement. Okay. So I know that fallen wall is not a raya. But it's not a raya either way. It's not a raya Shmei Hezek or a la Shmei Hezek. But in Tosafos, what makes nafal different? What makes nafal shiny? Because they got used to behaving privately. And because they're not used to behaving privately, therefore vision will be a damage for them. Therefore Hezek will be a idea for them. And that's why it's shiny. And therefore, actually, you're so concerned about Shmei Hezek and you're trying to prove from the Shmei Hezek, that would teach you that Shmei Hezek is only applicable when you get used to it. So because of the way he understands how nafal shiny, therefore it actually becomes an adrabah. It becomes a proof the other way. You're concerned with Shmei Hezek. This is the ultimate Shmei Hezek because they got used to behaving privately. Whereas in Rashi, they don't do with them getting used to anything. The nafal shiny because of a history. Okay, because they agree. It doesn't prove one way or the other. So there's no adrabah. It's just, did you not know that there's a different story here? It doesn't tell you any adrabah. Okay. This requires Chazara, obviously. And it's Hashem tomorrow, and we'll continue.